Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a meeting thinking how complex this topic is, and you find yourself checking out and maybe even starting to scroll Amazon? If so, you're not alone. As a leader, you obviously don't want your employees scrolling other websites while you're going over information. But can they help themselves when you're not presenting the information in a simple, clear, and concise manner? Next is simple. Everyone on the team must understand the goal. It must be clear. In addition to the goal being simple and clear, plans and directives must be communicated up and down the chain of command in a simple, clear, concise manner that can be comprehended by everyone. Simplicity is key, because if the team members cannot understand the goal or the plan to accomplish that goal, there is no possible way they can execute.
So keep it simple. I actually know somebody that does simple pretty well. His name's Garrett. Let me see if I can't get him on the phone. One second. Hey, what's up, Garrett? Yeah, remember that thing we were talking about? You think you can make it happen? Cool. I'll see you in a few. All right. Bye. What's up, Garrett? So for those that don't know, Garrett, I had the opportunity of meeting you about 3 years ago. Almost 4, maybe.
Almost 4. Yeah.
Probably on your first day, maybe not actually in Phoenix, but at work. We've had an opportunity to work together for a while. We do the one bad inning softball outside of work, which is fun. And I think we have very similar leadership styles, and I think that's probably one of the reasons we get along. And we also enjoy business acumen, and we will always talk about business to the point that some of our peers don't want to be around us because that's all we talk about.
To the point where our leaders are like, I know you two are going to want to nerd out on this, so you go have your fun, and then you can tell us what you talked about.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. I've accepted that.
Yep.
But one of the things that you always talk about is simple, right? And as we talk about leadership, for me, keeping things simple is paramount. And I know it's something that you always talk about with your folks. Was there something that led you to focus on simple, or how did you kind of bring that about?
Yeah, so I think for me, in the past, I've had leaders that might put a lot on my plate, right? And I understand that in large corporations or businesses, there's a lot of different initiatives and a lot of different things that you're focused on, right? We've got a lot of balls in the air. But if you're trying to focus on all of them, you're not really going to get anything done. And so I envision simple as being, let me come up with a actionable and achievable strategic goal, and then asking myself, is what I'm doing helping me or my team or the company achieve that goal, right? And so I need to focus in on that. It needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and then we're going to develop behaviors that are going to help us get to that goal, and then we're going to be able to move on to something else, right? If I'm giving my people a message that is convoluted and difficult to understand and isn't aligned with that strategic goal, we're never going to actually achieve it. And so trying to keep things as simple as possible to achieve that goal, and then we'll start talking about something else when we've developed habits that are going to stick, and we're never going to have to come back to that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and keeping things simple really helps your team understand the most important thing, and they can act in accordance with that, right? Where if you have so much information going on, they may not know how to act to get towards the end goal, right? So how as a leader, how do you ensure that your messaging and that your plans and that your goals are consistently simple?
So I try to think of simple in 2 different phases. So as an example, a company is focused on reducing expenses. Well, there's a lot of ways that you can reduce expenses. right? And so your strategic goal is, how do I reduce an expense? Well, my tactical goal is maybe, how do I change a process that is going to have a big picture effect and impact on reducing expenses. So if I am tasked with coming up with this initiative, one, I need to plan and create an initiative that is simple, achievable, and we are able to communicate it in a simple way. So my plan has to be simple. I can't have too many components that we're running around and we're trying to do all of these things, because we're not going to be able to execute on that, right? I need something simple and streamlined that I can execute.
Yep.
In that same vein, I need to be able to communicate it in a simple way.
Yeah.
So you think about large companies, and I always kind of have the example of the children's game of telephone.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm an executive at a company, 99% of the people that I need to execute on this strategic goal, I am not going to talk to in person. Right? I'm giving it to a leader who gives it to another leader, who relays that to another leader, who relays it to the folks that are doing the tactical job.
Yeah.
And there can be a lot lost in translation there. So I need to have some form of communication that is going to kind of filter down through all of those layers and still have the same message. So if I'm developing something, I need to think about, is it simple enough that we can execute on it? And do I have simple enough message points where everyone's going to understand what we're executing on?
I think that's a great point. And the thing that I've always heard, right, is that you need to keep things so simple that the least common denominator on your team can understand it. Meaning everybody on the team has to be able to understand, right? So you have to explain it to the person that is least likely to get it.
Yeah.
And if you're not able to do that, then you're not going to be successful. And the other part too that I think is interesting on that too, right, is if you keep a simple, clear goal, it's easy for anybody to make a decision, right? If I know that my goal is to reduce expenses, from your example, if I'm an associate that has, something come through, I can ask myself, does the decision that I make right now help achieve that goal of reducing expenses, or does it not? And if I understand your goal and the processes leading up to that, then that decision becomes pretty easy.
Yeah.
Easier said than done.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So what are the benefits that you're seeing from your folks that are trying to keep things simple?
So for me, I feel as if my people then have a greater connection to that goal, right? If I understand what we're trying to do, I can then have some conversations around bringing it full circle.
Yeah.
So, if I can reduce it to a yes or no question, like you just said, is this tactical decision that I'm making helping me achieve the strategic goal of reducing expenses? Yes. That's a win, right? That is a win, and if we win more than we lose, we're going to achieve our strategic goal.
Yeah.
And then we're going to be able to move on to the next one. Right? And it might still be under the umbrella of reducing expenses.
Right.
But we're actually going to see impactful change, and it's really planning that is executed on that is driving the positive result. And it's based on the behaviors, right? The behaviors that we had, us asking ourselves that question, and now I can move to something different.
Yeah.
And that is going to help support that goal. And I'm never going to have to backtrack. Right? I'm not going to have to backtrack to, hey, we're trying to do you remember that initiative that we had a year ago? We're retreading it because we didn't have the lasting impact that we wanted. I'm not going to have to do that because we've developed the habits, because we kept it simple, and now we were always able to ask ourselves that question of, is this or is this not supporting my strategic goal? To that end, maybe your the people that you lead are able to connect to that goal a little bit differently, right? It means something. Reduce expenses is this big word out in the cloud of, my day-to-day, the things that my people do day-to-day. How do they connect to that big picture? If I keep that simple for them, they connect to the big picture. They understand where the business is trying to go, right? And maybe I get more buy-in from them. They feel more connected to everything that we're doing, and we all come to work happy because we feel like we're achieving something. Instead of, I hear from a lot of employees at large companies of like, there's that disconnect, and I'm just doing this because I'm being told to do it, not because I understand the clear messaging on how it's going to help propel us forward and how that's going to help me.
So I think that's right on. The other thing that comes to mind, right, is the dichotomy here, that it's simple but not easy.
Yes.
And I think whatever organization you're working in, when you're coming up with some of these strategic goals or these initiatives that you're trying to achieve, you've got a lot of hands in the pot, if you will, right? So you may have like some type of process involved. You may have legal involved. You may have HR involved. And so when all of these different departments kind of come together, it gets pretty complex.
Yeah.
And even if you are sitting in a leadership meeting and going over the information, you may even question like what is really going on. So it is challenging to sometimes simplify that. How do you navigate some of the complexities to ensure that team understanding?
Yeah, I think so very challenging when you have a lot of voices in the room and maybe you have competing priorities in the room. Right? There have been plenty of times where I've said, I would like to keep this as simple as we can, and somebody comes in from a different, legal or HR and says, hey, well, it can't be that simple, right? Because we have things that impact that. Okay, great. So that just speaks to how do I strengthen bonds with those folks, right? How do I zoom out and understand that they're trying to help me too. Right, like we're all on the same team here. It's not me versus legal. I will lose that battle every time, right? But it's not me versus somebody else. It's, hey, we got to figure out how to make this as simple as possible. If you're telling me that has to be a component, or we have to have something in it, how do we simplify that then? Because my folks don't understand legal jargon. I don't understand legal jargon. So how do you put that in layman's terms for me to relay that to someone else? And I think maybe that takes some leadership courage, that takes relationship building, that takes a whole lot of stuff. And to your point, it's simple, but it's not easy. And so you got to put in a lot of groundwork to be able to do that, where I can look across the table at somebody and say, hey, I get it. You're telling me we need this. Now give it to me in the simplest terms. And, I need you to buy in, because if I don't get it in the simplest terms, I can't give it in the simplest terms, and no one understands what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think putting it in the simplest terms is the best way to go. And when I kind of think about that, one, I think it's preparation on the leader's standpoint, from the leader's perspective, right? Like, I shouldn't get a memo and then take one glance at it and then be able to go to my team and try and explain it. I should take the time to review that. And when I'm trying to present that to my team, I think about it as bullet points. And I'm going to try and give the information to my team in a bullet point that doesn't involve a run-on sentence, right?
Yeah.
So it's reduce expenses by X, Y, and Z, rather than we're going to reduce expenses by, eliminating operation costs through this process, which takes this. If I can really simplify it to one bullet point, that eliminates a lot of ambiguity. And to your point, some of the information that may be in this memo isn't really needed at the baseline level, right? It's just a way for, I guess, as a leader, how can I really just keep this super simple so that you can make the best decisions for the organization and for the customer or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And so that kind of reminds me of a lot of conversations that we've had. And one of the things that I know you do well as a leader is you're a filter, right? So you're a filter for your folks. Do the people that I lead need to know everything? Probably not, because I probably didn't need to get this email, right? Or maybe it helps me understand the direction that we're headed in, but I just need to keep my folks on the path that we're on, right? So do they need these emails, or can I filter this down and say, hey, we're doing a great job here, let's keep doing that, and remember to focus on this, right? And like you said, if I get a wide-ranging memo that's talking about reducing expenses from senior leadership, I got to remember that they're looking at this with a much broader lens than I am, and they're trusting me to understand and be that conduit between them and the people I lead as a first-line leader, right? And so, I think you're right. It's how do I break that down to a tactical decision that my people make every day? Hey, I know that we're trying to be a customer-centric company or whatever type of company you're in, and customers have these options. Well, remember, one of these options costs 3 times as much as the others. They might ask for that. It's our job to help educate them on why this other one is better for them, right? And that could be for a number of reasons, but I can say that in my email to them. That's different than the wide perspective email that I get. And that's my responsibility as a first line.
Yeah, great point. And you actually bring up one that helps a lot with keeping things simple. And I think it also applies to every other conversation that we have with our employees or with our families or with whoever, and it's the why. Explaining the why. That helps with buy-in, but it also helps make it real and hopefully keep simple for our folks too, right? Why are we doing this? And if you can tie that to how that's going to help the organization, how that's going to help their job, and then how it's going to help them, that's where you're going to get it, right? Like, what's in it for you by doing this? That really kind of solidifies, okay, I'm going to do this process because here's how it impacts me.
Yep.
And that's where you see success.
Yes, absolutely. Right, you got to give people something to connect to, no matter where you are, and the understanding behind why decisions are being made. And you get that buy-in, and then everything comes full circle.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay, I get it.
Let's think about advice for those that may not have the same focus on simple that maybe you and I do. If you were going to give somebody, a tip or two about heading down that path of keeping things simple, what would you recommend?
Loaded question.
But keep it simple.
Keep it simple, right? I would say one of the first things that you really need to do in whatever level of leadership you're in or wherever you're at is sit down and analyze the things that are important. Right? Yeah. What is truly important here? Because everything's important to some degree, right? But you've got to prioritize. You've got to prioritize what is the most important, and then you're going to understand these are the things that really matter, right? And maybe these things fall underneath that and they help me achieve these 3 or 4 things, but I'm going to put them under in this second tier and then another tier and another tier, and you start understanding the strategic versus the tactical, right? And so once you can identify what is strategic and what is more tactical, you can start to develop ideas and initiatives and processes and changing mindsets to achieve the how many ever strategic things you have, and then you start developing simple messaging for those 4 things, right? So it's almost, how do I simplify my business, figure out what's important, and then I can simplify how I can achieve those things. And so not easy, right? It's very difficult because you've got a lot of competing priorities, but you've got to figure out which ones are the most important, which ones you need to prioritize, and then you start developing your thoughts on how do I get to that in a simple manner.
Yeah, I completely agree. One, you have to know what is important, or what, either your organization or your family is most focused on. So you have to know. As information comes through, then you decide, hey, this is either in alignment with that focus or it's not. And if it's not, then I don't need to talk about that or pass it on with the same importance. The other thing that I would say at the very end of it too, right, that I like to do is I check for understanding, right? So we assume that once we present this information in our own terms, that our team members or our family is going to understand everything that we're trying to accomplish, right?
Yep.
But that's not always the case. And so to help ensure that they understand that, ask questions. Hey, repeat back to me what we just talked about, or what is our main priority? What is this process? And if they can explain it back to me, then we're good. We kept it simple. If not, okay, that's not their fault. That's my fault as a leader that I didn't explain it in a way that they could understand. So I need to then go back and make sure that I can explain it so that they do understand.
Yes, and I think that ties into the communication. So I'm glad you came there with the simple communication. So a lot of times I sit and I think, as I'm developing, how am I going to talk to my team or, friends or whoever it is, right, about what needs to happen. Could I explain this to somebody outside of my organization in broad terms, and they're going to understand, right? And they're going to say, oh yeah, like I'm drawing the dots, or I'm connecting the dots. I see the logic behind it. Because if they can get it, I'm going to explain it to the people I lead, and they're going to, I think you see it sometimes with when you share bullet points or you share things, your folks just jump in and they're like, oh, well, we could do that by XYZ, right? They get there themselves, and you're helping them understand, and that's a good feeling for them. If I can communicate this and explain what I'm trying to do to somebody, to my mom or dad that has no idea what I do in my daily work, right? Then I'm going to be able to explain it to somebody who actually, works for me and is doing it because they're connected to it. So I always kind of think, am I able to explain this to someone outside of here and they're going to understand it on a logic level and connect the dots? Well, then I'm going to be successful telling my folks, and I'm probably only going to get halfway through telling them the initiative, and they're going to start being like, oh, we're going to do it by this, and this.
Yeah.
Well, that's even better because now, they came up with the plan. So, yeah. Ownership, right? It gives them ownership, and you check for that understanding, and everyone's on the same page, and then you just go execute.
I like it.
Yeah.
Well, Garrett, thank you for the simple conversation.
Yeah.
And good luck keeping things simple.
Appreciate it.
Thank you to Garrett for coming on and sharing his thoughts on how to keep things simple. I think there are a lot of good takeaways there that will help improve your ability to explain things in a simple manner, whether it be to your team or a family member, coworker, whatever it may be. I also know that there was a lot of good dialogue in there that you may want to hear more about, and Garrett and I have already started talking about doing a little bit deeper dive into some of those areas. If you have a specific area that you'd like to learn more about, put it in the comments right here. We'd love to explore that and potentially make that into a future video. That's it for this episode of Take 10. We'll see you next time.